Let's talk about how to prepare a group presentation behind the scenes before you present. This is part 1 in a 3-part series on how to present in groups. In part 2, we'll talk about what you do on the day you present as you stand up to speak. And I'll put links to the other 2 parts of this series in the expandable description below as soon as they're posted. I've coached groups, I've coached co-presenters, and I have co-presented many times myself. I've packed all that experience into this video series. The advice works equally well for groups of 3 or 4 people or for co-presenters. It's up to you to adapt the tips to fit your specific situation. Here are 9 tips to prepare your group behind the scenes in approximately chronological order. First, everybody should develop the presentation content. It works best when each person in the group has played a part in crafting the content behind the scenes. What you don't want to do is have one person write it up and then magically expect the rest of the group members to present that content with excellence. Life doesn't usually work that way. Each individual in the group should be at their best when they create the content that they are personally going to be presenting, or at least part of it. In that light, you should delegate specific parts of the presentation to each person to research and draft. That doesn't mean that they'll be the only person presenting that piece of the presentation or that they'll only present that. But it's a good way to get everybody involved from the start to develop the content together. 2, divide the presentation equally. Everybody should be assigned areas of the presentation to lead so that it looks like a genuine team effort. A group presentation should not come across like one person is the solo performer and everybody else is part of their backup band. It should feel like a true team presentation. Before the next tip, I want to tell you that I have a website and a page full of free resources for you. It has downloads and even a free class on the top 5 communication skills that all professionals should have. I'll put a link to that page in the description below this video. Number 3, multiple group members should participate in each part of the presentation, and this tip will really set your group apart. What you don't want to do is simply delegate an entire section of the presentation to one person and then the next section to the next person and so forth. One very common mistake that groups make is they'll say, hey, there's 4 of us, so why don't we just divide the presentation into 4 parts, and then each person will essentially do their own thing, and then we'll string it together. Now that seems efficient, but it's going to make the presentation look choppy and disconnected. Your goal should be to present as a collaborative team. Here's how to get everybody involved in lots of places. If we look at a basic public speaking framework, there are 3 parts in the introduction: an attention grabber, your bottom line or thesis, and your preview or roadmap of the points to come in the body. Instead of having one person do your entire introduction, you can create a very dynamic team effort right from the start by assigning a different person in the group to each part of the introduction. In the body, you likely have 3 main points or so. Instead of assigning one entire main point to each group member, find a way to involve multiple group members in each of those points. You can have multiple people contribute to the conclusion as well. When you all contribute to the different parts of the presentation, this will give your presentation an engaging and dynamic team feeling. I want to emphasize this point by using a sports metaphor. A group presentation should not look like a relay race where each runner on the track runs their part of the race alone and then hands off the baton to the next runner. A group presentation should look more like a basketball game where each member on the team touches the ball numerous times with lots of passing throughout the game. Yes, this is a lot more work, but mixing it up like this will create a much more interesting and engaging presentation as a team and for your listeners. Number 4, assign parts of the presentation based upon each speaker's individual strengths. Each speaker should present an area that best fits them. So let's say you've done most of your research and information gathering, and now you have to decide who does what during the presentation. If a person is good at explaining graphs and statistics, they should lead that part of the presentation. If another person is good at acting out a skit or demonstration, then they should play a lead role and drive that skit. This helps avoid the situation where you're assigning people to areas of weakness, and it sets everybody up for success when you focus on their strengths. Number 5, create a shared slide deck, but prepare to present from your own slides. At this stage in the preparation process, some groups create a shared document to pull all the content together. This might be your earliest draft of a slide deck, for example. Now, it's 100% your decision whether or not you use, for example, PowerPoint slides in your presentation. But if you're using slides, then here's my advice. On the day of the presentation, it'll work best if each person presents from their own dedicated slides. In contrast, if you have, let's say, 5 bullet points on a specific slide and 2 or 3 people are supposed to be using that one slide to present a portion of the presentation, it can get very confusing about which presenter is supposed to talk about what part and when it's the next person's turn to jump in. I was working with a client where the president and CEO were co-presenting, but they were stepping on each other's toes some of the time because they were often speaking from the same slides. The way we fixed this is when we finalized the slides and rehearsed, we made sure each speaker spoke from their own dedicated slides. Sometimes a speaker would have more than one slide in a row, but each speaker knew which slide they owned. This 100% solved the confusion about who was presenting what. And a close variation of this is to split the slide in half. Speaker A talks about everything on the left side of the slide. Speaker B talks about everything that's on the right side of the slide. So sometimes really obvious slide splitting can work. If it's anything more complicated than that, it's very difficult to keep track of who talks about what on each slide. Number 6, agree on a delivery style. For most presentations, I recommend everybody speak from limited notes in a conversational style. This is called extemporaneous speaking. You'll have tons of practice by the time you present, and you'll only really need limited keywords on your notes, so everybody is free to connect with listeners and be in the moment. It's an important question to answer beforehand, because if you have one group member speaking conversationally and then another group member is reading word from a script, that's going to be inconsistent and it's going to lack team cohesion. Number 7, practice as individuals. Each individual should practice on their own. I recommend at least 10 times before the day of the presentation. Make sure you really know your stuff. You shouldn't have to look at your notes much at all by the time you present. This is a lot like the way actors are supposed to show up on a film set or on a stage. Each individual actor is supposed to know their lines and know their parts completely before they show up to practice the scene with the rest of the group. So to do that, you have to prepare on your own, alone in a room, to get lots of reps. But number 8, you also have to practice as a group. Just like actors filming a movie scene or performing on a stage, you must practice as an entire group because there's lots of moving parts to figure out together. I recommend groups practice together, let's say 3 to 5 times for an important presentation. And it's best to make your dress rehearsals as realistic as possible. If you can, practice in the actual room at least a few times beforehand. And when you practice, you'll have some decisions to make. Should you all stand the entire time, for instance, or should you sit? How are you going to use the space so you all look evenly distributed in the speaking area and comfortable? Decide who's going to manage the slides and make sure that person working the slides doesn't get stuck behind the computer podium like they've been relegated to some second-class status in the group. I can't list all of the things you might make decisions about. The only way to figure that out is to practice as a group, keep it realistic as possible, and make those decisions while you're rehearsing together. And while you're practicing as a group, it's also important to give each other helpful feedback to make improvements for anything you notice. I recommend you follow this rule. If you see something, say something. It's a classic for a reason. If someone sounds or looks like they're reading directly from the notes, for example, encourage them to speak more conversationally and use more eye contact. You might think to yourself, well, maybe they're looking at their notes because there's no audience here yet. But don't assume. In my experience, the way we practice behind the scenes is a very good predictor of how we'll present in the actual moment. So if you see them do something that's obviously not quite right yet, give them some helpful feedback during group practice. Number 9, polish the slide deck. In your group rehearsal phase, one person should be in charge of polishing the deck to make sure the slides all look coherent. When everybody contributes to the slides in the beginning of this process, it's likely to result in typos, different size fonts and colors. Some slides will only have keywords and other slides might have lots of full sentences. Assign one person who is skilled at slide design to make sure you fix all of those inconsistencies. Those final touches will make a huge difference. And that should be the version of the slide deck you practice from as a group, at least in the last couple of run-throughs. Here's a summary of the 9 tips to help you prepare your presentation behind the scenes. In part 2 of this series, I'll give you tips on how to present more effectively as a group during the actual presentation. As mentioned, feel free to take a look at my website for all of those free resources. Until next time, thanks, God bless, and I'll see you soon.